So just imagine diagnosing like over 3,000 children with developmental disorders.
Right.
You spent your entire career analyzing neurological markers, memorizing all these textbook definitions, mastering the most complex medical protocols. You were essentially the ultimate authority in the room.
Yeah, the expert.
Exactly. But then, phone rings,
Mm.
and it's the school principal.
Oh, no.
Right. Your own child is melting down. They're like throwing a chair in the cafeteria, and suddenly all of that immense clinical expertise you have is just entirely useless.
Completely out the window.
Right. And today, that's exactly what we're exploring on this deep dive. We're pulling apart this deeply personal, just remarkably candid piece of writing from Gendai Business, and it's authored by Dr. Ayumi Hoshino.
And, what makes her account so compelling, is really the sheer scale of her clinical data set, right? Juxtaposed against the intimacy of her own living room.
Yeah, it's such a stark contrast.
It really is. Over 3,000 distinct cases, 3,000 families sitting in her office seeking her guidance. Yet when her own son, who, by the way, was later diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, when he began exhibiting these severe behavioral problems in elementary school, she found herself completely unmoored.
Wow.
Yeah, the clinical armor it failed her.
Which I think really shatters this whole illusion we have about expertise, right?
Mhm.
Like, we tend to believe that if we just acquire enough knowledge about a problem.
We're safe.
Exactly. We think we immunize ourselves against the actual pain of it. But Dr. Hoshino's experience suggests that the exact opposite might be true.
Yeah.
So the core mission of our deep dive today, for everyone listening, isn't just to list out the symptoms of ASD. We're really trying to analyze the friction between medical theory and the messy, chaotic reality of human behavior.
Right, how we define norm.
Yes, how we as a society construct that concept of normalcy. And the radical shift in parenting philosophy that's actually required when these traditional systems completely fail your child.
And to really understand that friction, we have to look at the psychological dissonance of occupying both of those roles simultaneously.
You mean being the doctor and the mom?
Exactly. Being the detached observer and the emotionally entangled parent. Because in a clinical setting, a doctor operates within a highly, highly controlled environment. The assessment tools, like, say, the Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule, they're incredibly structured. You have a finite window.
Like, what, a couple of hours?
Maybe 2 hours, yeah. And in that time, you synthesize behavioral data against a standardized medical framework. So you're evaluating the child's executive function, their pragmatic language, their sensory processing, but you're doing all of it from this very safe, objective distance.
Yeah, because you're not the one who just spent, like, the last 3 hours trying to convince that exact same child that the seams in their socks aren't a literal physical threat.
Right, exactly.
If I'm thinking about an analogy for this, it's kind of like being a master mechanic.
Oh, I like that.
The exact thermodynamic principles of a combustion engine, right? You could literally rebuild a transmission blindfolded in this brightly lit, pristine, temperature-controlled garage.
Sure.
But then, you're driving your own car on the highway, it's the dead of night, you're in a freezing downpour, and the engine just completely seizes.
Right, the context changes everything.
It does. Because all that theoretical knowledge, knowing exactly which piston misfired and why it happened, none of that shields you from the visceral panic of being stranded on the side of the highway with your family in the back seat.
No, the rain still soaks you.
Exactly. The knowledge doesn't stop the physiological stress response.
And, that visceral panic is driven by the amygdala, and having a medical degree, does not offer an override switch for the human nervous system.
No, it definitely doesn't.
When that school calls in the middle of a workday, the parent's body is just flooded with cortisol, regardless of the letters after their name. But actually, take that mechanic analogy a step further.
Okay.
The clinical knowledge might actually act as an amplifier for the anxiety.
I was wondering about that because if I'm a pediatrician and I've evaluated 3,000 children,
Yeah.
I haven't just seen the mild cases or like the success stories.
Right, you've seen the whole spectrum.
I've seen the absolute extremes. I've seen the kids who fall entirely through the cracks of the social safety net. So if I see a specific behavioral marker in my own kid, my brain isn't just seeing a quirk, right? It's automatically projecting this like 15-year statistical trajectory.
Yeah, in the field, we actually call that medical catastrophizing.
Medical catastrophizing. Why?
Yeah, because a parent without a clinical background, They might witness their child intensely lining up toy cars instead of playing with them, and they might just think, oh, they're just very organized, it's a phase.
Right, they get to be blissfully ignorant.
Exactly. They possess the luxury of naive optimism, but the developmental pediatrician, they do not have that luxury.
No.
Their brain immediately cross-references that action with like thousands of data points regarding rigid, repetitive behaviors. They understand the compounding nature of developmental delays.
That sounds exhausting.
Oh, it is. The cognitive load of constantly forecasting those worst-case scenarios while simultaneously, just trying to get your kid to eat breakfast, it's a recipe for profound burnout.
And the timeline here is really critical too, I think, because Dr. Hoshino's article specifically highlights the elementary school environment as the real flashpoint.
Yes.
Like, the severe behavioral issues didn't peak in toddlerhood. They peaked when her son entered the standardized education system.
Which is very common.
But why is that specific environment the crucible? Like, I mean, we know schools are rigid, but what is actually happening neurologically that makes elementary school the breaking point for a neurodivergent child?
Well, the shift from preschool to elementary school, it represents a really fundamental restructuring of cognitive and sensory demands.
Okay, how so?
Think about preschool. In a play-based preschool environment, the setting is highly adaptable to the child. If a child needs to move around, they move.
Right, it's very fluid.
But elementary school flips that paradigm entirely. Suddenly, the child is expected to adapt to an inflexible environment. And neurologically, this places an unprecedented demand on two major things: sensory gating and executive function.
Okay, so break down sensory gating for me in the context of a classroom.
Yeah.
Because I think for you and me, we just take it for granted that we can sit in a room and focus. But what is actually happening under the hood there?
Yeah. So sensory gating is essentially the neurological process by which the brain filters out redundant or unnecessary stimuli.
Okay.
So in a neurotypical brain, if you're sitting in a classroom, your brain very quickly identifies the hum of the fluorescent lights, or the scratch of a pencil 3 desks over, or, the smell of the cafeteria down the hall.
Right, and it just tunes it out.
Exactly. It tags it as irrelevant background noise and dampens those signals. That way, your prefrontal cortex can focus entirely on the teacher's voice.
But for a child with ASD, that filter is what? Compromised? Or just entirely absent?
In many cases, it's entirely absent. The brain processes the hum of that light bulb at the exact same volume and intensity as the teacher's instructions.
Oh, wow. That sounds overwhelming.
It is. The sensory input isn't just distracting, it is physically painful. It triggers the autonomic nervous system, so the child is basically thrown into a localized fight-or-flight response simply by existing in the room.
Just by sitting there.
Just by being there. And this concept, we refer to it as allostatic load.
Allostatic load.
Yes, it's the wear and tear on the body that accumulates as an individual is exposed to repeated or chronic stress.
Which completely explains the behavioral meltdown, like the throwing of the chair we mentioned earlier. It isn't an act of malice or rebellion. It's a pressure valve releasing because the allostatic load has just exceeded the brain's capacity to cope.
Exactly. The battery is completely drained.
And then, you add the social complexity on top of all that sensory overload.
Oh, absolutely. The hidden curriculum of the classroom.
The hidden curriculum.
Yeah, because elementary school introduces these unwritten social rules that rely really heavily on intuitive executive functioning.
Right.
It's not just about, finishing the math worksheet. It's knowing that you have to wait for the teacher to look at you before you raise your hand, or understanding the really subtle social hierarchy out on the playground.
It's like being asked to act in a play where everyone else was handed a script, but you were only handed a list of the props on stage.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
You could see the physical pieces of the environment, but you have absolutely no idea what the narrative rhythm is actually supposed to be.
And when the child inevitably misses one of those unwritten cues, the environment immediately pathologizes the behavior.
Right. They get labeled as a bad kid.
Exactly. A coping mechanism that was perfectly acceptable back in the living room, like pacing or maybe making a repetitive vocalization to self-soothe, suddenly that becomes a disruption.
Because it halts the standardized flow of the classroom?
Right. And the system, because it's built to manage a ratio of, say, 30 children to 1 adult, it demands compliance above absolutely everything else.
Which really brings us to that agonizing threshold that Dr. Hoshino describes. That moment when the collision between the child's neurology and the school's expectations forces the parent to finally ask, Could my child be?
Yeah, it's a terrifying realization.
Because you're stepping off the standard path.
Yeah.
And Dr. Oshino points to 3 specific developmental markers that usually trigger this questioning for parents, right?
She does.
She lists speech development, communication styles, and strong fixations.
And, the ambiguity embedded in those 3 markers, that's really what makes the diagnostic process so fraught for a parent.
How so?
Well, we like to think of a diagnosis as a binary thing, like a broken bone on an X-ray. You either have it or you don't.
Right, it's clear cut.
But neurological traits exist on a spectrum, and the line between a really robust personality quirk and a diagnosable developmental trait is highly porous, and honestly, it's deeply subjective.
Okay, let's take speech development, for example, because we know pediatricians use milestone charts, right? Like, at 2 years old, the child should have 50 words. At 3 years old, they should be combining words into short sentences.
Right, the standard metrics.
But those milestone charts are based on a Gaussian distribution, like a bell curve of neurotypical development.
Yeah,
Which means they inherently pathologize anyone who's operating on the margin.
exactly.
So if a kid hits 40 words instead of 50, the parents are just thrown into an absolute panic
And the problem with those charts is that they primarily measure expressive language.
in just the sheer number of words.
Right, the pure volume of vocabulary. But they often completely fail to capture pragmatic language, which is how language is actually used in the social contexts. Oh, interesting.
So a child might possess an incredibly advanced vocabulary. They might speak like a miniature university professor about astrophysics.
Right.
But they might entirely lack the ability to use that language for reciprocal connection. Like they can lecture you for an hour, but they cannot converse with you.
So the question becomes, is that a developmental delay or simply a really intensely intellectual, introverted personality?
Exactly. And that distinction blurs even further when we start looking at communication styles.
Yeah, because the expectations we have for communication, a lot of them are just culturally fabricated, aren't they?
Oh, almost entirely.
Like, we expect children to maintain a very specific duration of eye contact to signal respect and attention.
Right.
But if a child looks away to process auditory information, which, by the way, is a very common and highly efficient neurological adaptation for a lot of neurodivergent individuals, society immediately flags that as defiance or inattention.
We demand that they perform this physical pantomime of listening.
Yes, exactly. Even if performing that pantomime drains the exact cognitive resources they actually need to comprehend the words being spoken to them.
Wow, that's such a catch-22.
It really is. The societal standard basically demands masking.
Masking. But, the hypocrisy of that standard becomes glaringly obvious when we look at how society treats adults versus how we treat children.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Dr. Hoshino's third marker is strong fixations or obsessions.
Yeah.
The kid who only wants to talk about regional train schedules or like the mechanical components of a vacuum cleaner.
Yes.
In childhood, we treat this as a symptom, something that needs to be managed or just completely extinguished.
Right. And the psychological concept at play here is called monotropism.
Monotropism. Break that down for me.
It's a cognitive strategy characterized by a tendency to focus attention really tightly on a very small number of interests. And as a result, they miss things outside of this attention tunnel.
Okay, makes sense.
But the traditional school system, it demands the opposite. It demands polytropism.
Right, jumping from thing to thing.
Exactly. The ability to constantly shift your attention across a wide array of mildly interesting topics. Math for 40 minutes, then history, then physical education.
And a monotropic brain finds that constant task switching just agonizing.
It's incredibly dysregulating for them.
And here's the wild part. If you survive that school system and you make it to adulthood with your monotropism intact,
yeah.
society suddenly changes its tune completely.
Oh, entirely.
Like, think about a software engineer who codes for 14 hours straight.
Right.
They forget to eat. They're hyper-fixated on solving this complex algorithm. Or like an Olympic athlete who organizes every waking second of their life around their training.
Right.
We don't pathologize them. We call them visionaries or prodigies or simply highly driven professionals. We literally reward adult fixations with massive salaries and magazine covers.
It's so true. The exact same neurological profile is framed as a disorder in a 7-year-old and a literal superpower in a 30-year-old.
Which is crazy.
The only variable that changed was the environmental context and the societal utility of that fixation.
Which raises a really fundamental philosophical question for you listening right now. If a child has a profound monotropic fixation on something, Why are we so desperate to slap a label on it?
It's a great question.
Like, why does the parent have to categorize it as a developmental trait rather than just accepting it as a really intense personality?
Hmm.
What is the actual function of the medical label?
Well, the label is a systemic key.
A key.
Yes, and this is the tragic paradox that parents face. Internally, within the family unit, every parent wants to believe their child's differences are merely unique expressions of individuality.
Of course.
But externally, the school system is a bureaucratic machine. It operates on strict legal mandates.
Right.
So if you go and tell a school principal, oh, my child just has a really intense personality, so he needs to pace the back of the room to focus, the school will likely just respond with disciplinary action for breaking the rules.
Because they have no legal obligation to accommodate a quote-unquote personality.
Precisely. They don't have to accommodate a personality. But if you walk into that exact same principal's office with a piece of paper that says autism spectrum disorder,
It changes everything.
everything, that medical label triggers federal and state protections. It forces the creation of an individualized education program, or an IEP.
Oh, right. The IEP.
Yeah, it legally mandates that the school provide occupational therapy, or allow noise-canceling headphones, or provide alternative testing environments.
So really, the medicalization of the child's personality is often the only way to shield them from the punitive mechanisms of the state.
Exactly. It's an institutional trap.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
You basically have to willingly subject your child to societal stigma and adopt all this language of pathology just to carve out enough space for them to exist safely in a classroom.
And the emotional toll of making that choice, I mean, it is staggering. The parent undergoes a profound grieving process.
Grieving the diagnosis.
Well, not a grief for the child sitting in front of them necessarily, but a grief for the phantom average parenting experience they were culturally promised.
I see.
Acknowledging that label means accepting that the path forward will be a constant, exhausting negotiation with systems that were simply not built for your family.
Which I think brings us to the actual breaking point for Dr. Hoshino.
Right.
Because she possessed all the medical vocabulary, she understood the diagnostic criteria, she likely secured all the necessary accommodations and IEPs for her son.
Undoubtedly.
Yet the friction remained. The daily reality was still just tearing her family apart.
Yes.
So if the traditional medical model, diagnose, accommodate, manage, if that was insufficient, she had to construct an entirely new framework,
She did.
and she completely redefined the end game of parenting.
She essentially abandoned the pursuit of normalcy, and she replaced it with the philosophy that, well, it sounds deceptively simple, but is, in reality, a radical rejection of the systemic status quo.
Which is what?
Her stated goal shifted to implementing parenting methods designed so that, and this is a quote, both parent and child become happy.
Mutual happiness.
Mutual happiness.
I want to spend a lot of time on this because it challenges literally everything we are taught about child rearing.
It really does.
So let's look at the standard metric first. If the goal isn't happiness, what is the default goal that society hands to parents of neurodivergent children?
Well, the default metric is compliance.
Compliance.
Yes. It is a performance-based metric heavily influenced by behavioral psychology specifically, therapies derived from applied behavior analysis.
Right.
The unstated objective there is to train the child to mimic neurotypical behavior as closely as possible, ultimately minimizing their disruption to the surrounding environment.
And the entire architecture of childhood discipline is built on this.
Absolutely.
Like, we use sticker charts to reward a child for sitting still, even if their sensory system is just screaming for proprioceptive input. We give them a piece of candy for making eye contact, even if, as we discussed, eye contact completely scrambles their ability to process auditory information.
Exactly.
We are essentially conditioning them to override their own internal neurological reality, just to make the adults in the room feel more comfortable.
That's spot on. We are training them to mask.
Masking again.
Yeah, and masking is the conscious or sometimes subconscious suppression of neurodivergent traits in order to pass as neurotypical.
And while masking might, earn the child a good behavior award at school, the cognitive cost is just devastating.
It drains the prefrontal cortex completely.
Right. Because the child holds it together all day long, expending massive amounts of energy just to perform normalcy.
And then what happens?
They walk through their front door at 3:30 p.m. and completely collapse.
Exactly, the after-school meltdown.
And the parents get the absolute brunt of it. Meanwhile, the school says, well, he's an angel for us.
Which is so frustrating for parents, but it happens because the school is only measuring compliance. Dr. Hoshino's pivot to mutual happiness is a total rejection of that compliance metric. She introduces what we might call a capacity metric.
A capacity metric, how does that work?
So instead of evaluating the day by asking, did my son behave normally today?
Yeah.
The parent begins asking, how much neurological battery does my son have left? What is the actual quality of his internal experience?
Okay, but let me push back hard on this for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Because mutual happiness sounds beautiful in a psychology seminar, right?
Right.
But let's put ourselves back in that scenario we discussed earlier. It's 1:00 p.m. on a Wednesday.
Okay.
The principal calls. Your kid just threw a desk and is currently hiding under a table, refusing to speak.
Yeah.
If I am that parent, my instinct isn't mutual happiness. My instinct is sheer terror that my kid is going to get expelled, followed by intense embarrassment, followed by anger at my child for putting me in this terrible position.
Which is a very human reaction.
Right. So how does a parent practically reconcile this utopian philosophy of happiness with the very real, very punitive demands of society?
Well, that is the ultimate test of the philosophy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dr. Hoshino had to completely deprogram her own internal biases to make this work. Because prioritizing mutual happiness doesn't mean you just applaud the child for throwing the desk.
Okay, good.
Nor does it mean shielding them from all natural consequences. It means you fundamentally alter your interpretation of the event itself.
How so? Walk me through the psychological shift the parent makes when that phone rings.
Okay, so under the compliance model, that phone call is internalized as a personal failure.
Right.
The parent internalizes the school's judgment. The school views the child as a problem, so the parent unconsciously begins viewing the child as a problem.
So they drive to the school angry.
Exactly. The parent drives to the school angry, brings the child home, and implements a punishment.
Grounding, taking away a screen, a long lecture.
Right, and suddenly the home just becomes an extension of the school's disciplinary apparatus. There's no safe harbor anywhere for the child.
Wow. The parent just becomes the enforcement agent for a system that doesn't even understand their kid.
Precisely. The parent and child become adversaries. And clearly, neither of them is happy in that scenario.
No.
But if the parent operates under the metric of mutual happiness, the reaction to the principal's call is entirely different.
Okay.
The parent understands that the desk throwing was not a calculated act of malice. It wasn't a failure of character. It was a severe allostatic stress response to an intolerable environment.
So instead of trying to cure the symptom of the behavior, you interrogate the environment.
Exactly. The parent drives to the school not as an enforcer, but as an investigator and as a collaborator.
Right.
The parent sits down with the principal and says, look, my child's nervous system was so overwhelmed today that he literally lost control of his body. What sensory or social demands pushed him over his threshold, and how do we adjust this environment tomorrow so he can remain regulated?
Man, that requires an immense amount of courage from the parent.
It really does.
Because you are actively pushing the burden of adaptation back onto the institution. You are demanding that the environment bend, rather than forcing the child to break.
Yeah, exactly.
But wait, why is this called mutual happiness? Like, I see how it protects the child and makes them happier, but how does this make the parent happy? The parent is still the one having to go fight the school system.
Well, the happiness for the parent comes from the liberation of radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance.
Yeah, because the chronic, soul-crushing anxiety of parenting often stems from the gap between the child you actually have and the idealized neurotypical child you expected to have.
Oh, wow. That's heavy.
It is. When you spend every waking moment trying to force a square peg into a round hole, you destroy your own mental health.
Because you view every single quirk as a symptom that needs to be extinguished.
Right. You are constantly on edge, just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
You're trying to cure something that isn't a disease, it's an operating system.
That is exactly it. It's an operating system. And when Dr. Hoshino finally let go of the need for her son to be normal, she freed herself from all of that anxiety.
So mutual happiness means the parent gets to stop playing warden and start playing architect.
Yes. You focus your energy on building a life architecture that actually supports the child's neurology.
Like, if the child has a massive monotropic fixation on trains.
The parent stops fighting it and starts leveraging it.
Oh, I see. You use trains to teach math. You use trains to teach history, to connect emotionally.
Exactly. You find joy in who they actually are, rather than constantly mourning who they aren't.
And I would hypothesize that when a child feels that unconditional positive regard, like when they realize their parent is no longer trying to constantly fix them, their baseline anxiety must drop massively.
Oh, the clinical data supports that hypothesis entirely.
Really?
Yes. When the demand for masking is reduced in the home, the child's allostatic load decreases significantly.
Right. Their batteries charging instead of draining.
Exactly. And with a lower baseline of stress, the explosive behavioral incidents in other environments often naturally diminish.
Because they have more capacity.
The child literally has more neurological bandwidth to navigate the world because they aren't spending it all just defending themselves against their own parents' expectations.
Wow. We have covered just incredible ground today.
We really have.
So for everyone tuning in, what does this all mean? We started by examining the sheer inadequacy of clinical detachment when you're faced with the raw, chaotic reality of parenting.
Right.
We saw how a doctor with over 3,000 clinical evaluations still found her medical toolkit totally lacking when her own son's nervous system collided with the rigid, compliance-based architecture of the elementary school system.
And we dissected the inherently subjective nature of our diagnostic criteria, right?
Yes, recognizing how milestone charts and societal expectations frequently pathologize the very same traits, like that monotropic focus or divergent communication that we openly celebrate and reward in adults.
Which is still wild to me.
And finally, we explored Dr. Hoshino's profound pivot, abandoning the agonizing pursuit of normalcy in favor of cultivating mutual happiness.
A huge shift.
Yeah, a shift from forcing the child to mask their reality just to appease the environment, to aggressively shaping the environment to support the child's capacity.
Which, is a framework that extends far beyond the realm of just neurodivergent parenting.
It really does. Because for you, the listener, right now, whether you are managing a diverse team of employees or navigating a complex romantic relationship or simply trying to understand your own internal wiring, this really changes the lens through which you view friction.
Absolutely.
When someone is struggling or failing to meet a standard, the question shifts from how do I fix this person to what invisible demands is this environment placing on them?
That is the ultimate takeaway. It forces a rigorous reevaluation of the structures we just take for granted.
And it leaves us with a final, rather unsettling thought to carry forward into the week.
I think so too.
Because we started this deep dive talking about the comfort of an X-ray, right? The undeniable biological truth of a broken bone.
The clear binary.
Exactly. But throughout this hour, we've seen how a medical expert who has clinically examined thousands of children still grappled with the invisible, blurry boundary between a personality trait and a developmental disorder.
Right.
And if the boundary is that ambiguous for a doctor of her caliber, it implies that our societal definitions of normal behavior are not biological truths at all.
No, they are.
They are merely social agreements. They are just invisible boxes we invented to make managing large groups of people easier.
That's all they are.
So as you move through your week, I want you to consider this. How much of your own vital energy are you expending trying to fold yourself or the people you love into a box that might not actually exist?